I had never thought of myself as someone who would ever blur boundaries, especially when it came to my daughter's relationships. I raised Emily to be independent, to think for herself, and to choose people in her life based on values and respect. I taught her that trust was like glass. Once shattered, it could be pieced back together, but it would never be the same. That lesson had guided me through my own life, especially after my divorce 10 years ago. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Emily arrived home from college for the long weekend, her face glowing in a way I hadn't seen in years. Behind her was a tall, clean-cut young man with warm hazel eyes and an easy smile. "Mom, this is Daniel," Emily said, beaming. "We've been seeing each other for a while." Daniel extended his hand, and there was a firmness in his handshake that spoke of confidence without arrogance. "It's nice to finally meet you, Mrs. Miller." I corrected him immediately. "Please call me Sarah." That first dinner was simple: baked chicken, roasted vegetables, and apple pie, but the conversation was rich and lively. Daniel spoke about his upbringing in a small town in Oregon, his passion for woodworking, and his plans to open his own furniture studio. Emily's eyes lit up whenever he spoke, and I could see she admired him deeply. The days that followed should have been uneventful, but life has a way of planting small seeds that later grow into unexpected situations. On Monday morning, Emily had to drive out to meet a friend 2 towns over, leaving Daniel at the house while she ran errands. "You don't mind if he stays here while I'm gone, do you?" she asked. "Of course not," I said. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, maybe just a bit of polite small talk over coffee before I went about my day. But that morning turned into something different. Daniel was in the kitchen making himself a cup of tea when he noticed me struggling to open a jar of strawberry preserves. Without a word, he stepped over, took the jar from my hands, and opened it effortlessly. We both laughed at how ridiculous the situation was, but that simple exchange made me notice something, not about Daniel himself, but about the presence he carried. It was steady, patient, unhurried. We ended up talking for almost an hour. He told me about the challenges of moving away from home, about how he missed his grandmother's cooking, and about how Emily had brought so much joy back into his life after he'd gone through a difficult breakup. That should have been the end of it, just a warm, friendly conversation. But in the days that followed, I found myself thinking about that ease we shared. Not in a romantic way, but in a human way, the way you notice when someone sees you, really sees you without judgment. Later that week, Emily had an important class presentation to prepare for and spent most of her day at the library. Daniel, again, was at the house. He offered to help me in the garden, and I accepted. We spent the afternoon pulling weeds, planting new flowers, and talking about everything from favorite books to what makes a house feel like a home. It was during that afternoon that the first flicker of concern lit in my mind. I realized I was looking forward to our conversations more than I should. I told myself it was harmless. He was simply kind, attentive, and respectful. But deep down, I knew I had to tread carefully. One evening, after Emily had gone upstairs to take a call, Daniel and I found ourselves alone in the living room. A documentary about art and craftsmanship played quietly on the television. Daniel pointed out a segment on woodworking techniques and began explaining how he'd built a coffee table for his apartment. I listened, genuinely interested, but also aware of the comfortable bubble that had formed between us. It was then that I reminded myself, this is your daughter's boyfriend. Your place is to support her, not interfere. I kept my distance after that. Or at least I tried. Everything changed on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Emily had been called in to work unexpectedly, and Daniel, caught without an umbrella, returned to the house soaked through. I handed him a towel, and he sat at the kitchen table while I made tea. The conversation started light, but somewhere along the way, it took a turn toward the personal. He told me about his parents' divorce when he was 13, about how he had to grow up quickly, and how he often felt like he had to protect everyone else before himself. I shared my own struggles of raising Emily alone, of trying to be both strong and gentle, even when I was falling apart inside. By the time Emily returned home, the atmosphere in the kitchen had shifted, not in a romantic sense, but in the quiet knowledge that we now shared parts of ourselves with each other that we hadn't shared with many others. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the conversation in my mind and wondered if I had crossed a line. I hadn't done anything wrong, yet I knew that emotional connections can be as powerful, if not more so, than physical ones. The next morning, I made a decision. I would talk to Emily. She deserved honesty, even if it made things awkward. When I sat her down in the living room, I explained that Daniel was a good man and that I understood why she cared for him. But I also admitted that I had grown close to him in a way I hadn't expected and that I didn't want that to cause any problems for her. Emily was quiet for a long time. Then she smiled, not with amusement, but with a kind of relief. "Mom," she said, "I'm glad you like him. I was afraid you wouldn't, but I trust you. I know you'd never hurt me." I promised her I wouldn't, and I meant it. From that day forward, I set clear boundaries. I limited my time alone with Daniel and focused on being present for Emily, not just as her mother, but as her biggest supporter. The emotional pull was still there, but it faded over time as I reminded myself where my loyalty lay. Months later, Emily and Daniel announced they were moving in together. I helped them find a small apartment and even gifted them the dining table from our family home. On moving day, Daniel hugged me and said, "Thank you for always making me feel welcome, Sarah. You've been like family from day one." And in that moment, I knew that crossing the line hadn't been about romance or betrayal. It had been about realizing that sometimes connections form unexpectedly, and it's our choices afterward that define our integrity. Even now, years later, Daniel and Emily visit often. I watch them sit together on the couch, laughing about old memories, and I feel a quiet pride. Not because I resisted temptation, but because I chose to protect something far more important, my daughter's trust. I crossed a line in my heart, but I stepped back before it could harm anyone. And that, I think, is what makes all the difference.